Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. Today we're doing a deep dive into a situation that has, truly reshaped the global landscape. We're talking about the emergence of open warfare between Iran and Israel in June 2025. Now, for decades, these two nations have been locked in a kind of shadow war, right? Clashing indirectly, proxy, cyber attacks, intense political maneuvering all across the Middle East. But now, we're seeing direct military confrontation for the very first time. Yeah, and that marks a huge moment in modern history. Let's try to unpack this.
It's really striking, isn't it? Because this isn't just some regional issue confined to the Middle East. Its impact, the ripples are already being felt everywhere across continents. We've seen immediate, pretty significant disruption in global energy markets, a really dramatic spike in tensions among the major world powers, and most tragically, millions of lives. They're now at immense immediate risk. The implications are just so far-reaching. They touch everything from economic stability, global economic stability, to diplomatic alliances. This isn't just another news cycle. It feels like a fundamental shift.
That's a really crucial point. So our mission today, for you, our listener, is to help you grasp the intricate layers of this critical situation. We want to give you the context you need to be truly well-informed. To cut through the noise and offer some clarity, we'll explore where this crisis came from, its deep origins, trace how it evolved so alarmingly, and of course dissect the current, very dynamic state of play. And to really understand where we are now, I think we absolutely have to look back at the history between these two nations, which is surprisingly different than you might expect.
Yeah, it might genuinely surprise a lot of you listening to learn that Iran and Israel, they weren't always enemies. Not at all. In fact, if you go back, rewind the clock to before the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the picture was remarkably different. Iran, back then under the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, actually recognized Israel, and it was more than just, a formal nod. They had these discreet but quite productive ties.
Right, it wasn't just on paper. There was real cooperation happening, albeit quietly. It's exactly sharing vital intelligence, significant trade, even some coordination on military strategy and technology. It was, pragmatic. A partnership built on shared worries about regional stability, maybe common opposition to Arab nationalism back in the Cold War context. This quiet collaboration, it's almost unthinkable today, isn't it? It just highlights how fast geopolitical alignments can completely flip.
Absolutely. That pre-79 era is such a stark reminder of how fluid international relations can be. Their relationship was pragmatic, as you said, even collaborative sometimes. It shows just how quickly internal political changes can shift everything. That period really underscores a moment where, shared strategic interests, even if they were kept quiet, outweighed the differences. It demonstrates how profoundly a nation's internal transformation, like the revolution, can just reorient its entire foreign policy almost overnight.
So how did we get from that sort of quiet cooperation to open warfare? Well, that shift after 1979, it marked a complete ideological U-turn. It really set the stage for decades of animosity. When the Islamic Republic was established in 79, Iran's stance changed immediately and dramatically. The new revolutionary government, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, took a staunchly anti-Israel position. They started calling it the Zionist regime.
That specific terminology became central.
And Khomeini himself issued this powerful decree. He declared opposition to Israel wasn't just politics. It was a religious obligation. So this wasn't just, tweaking foreign policy. It was a fundamental redefinition of Iran's identity, its purpose. It intertwined religious doctrine with state ideology, specifically against Israel.
A profound transformation. It completely reshaped how Iran saw itself and the region, pivoting from that covert, maybe reluctant ally to an overt ideological adversary. That really laid the groundwork for the long rivalry we've seen ever since.
Okay, so after that huge ideological shift, Iran starts building its proxy network, right? Can you explain that a bit more?
Yes, that's right. It was a very deliberate strategy, a strategic move to project power, exert influence across the region. But, and this is key, without engaging in direct, overt military conflict themselves, for a long time at least. They provided substantial support money, weapons, training, logistical help to various armed groups, political organizations that shared their anti-Israeli view or, broader anti-Western feelings.
Like Hezbollah.
Exactly. Hezbollah in Lebanon is probably the most prominent example. It emerged as this really formidable non-state actor right on Israel's northern border, basically a highly capable militia backed by Iran. Then there's Hamas in Gaza, another key player in the Palestinian territories, receiving significant Iranian support over the years. And more recently, we've seen the Houthi rebels in Yemen become very active, their attacks on shipping lanes adding another complex layer impacting global trade directly.
So this whole strategy, this proxy warfare, it allowed Iran to challenge Israel from a distance.
Precisely. To achieve its objectives, challenge Israeli interests, but cleverly avoid the direct military conflict that, well, until June 2025, had largely seemed unthinkable for decades.
Okay, so Iran builds this network. From Israel's perspective, how did they view all this growing network, plus Iran's own military getting stronger? That must have been concerning.
Oh, absolutely. It became an ever-increasing source of grave concern, existential concern, really. Israel views Iran's military development, and especially its nuclear ambitions, as nothing less than an existential threat. For Israel, it's not just policy differences or a power struggle. It's framed consistently as a matter of national survival.
And how did Israel respond to that perceived threat, particularly the nuclear program?
Well, Israel has been accused of taking direct covert actions to disrupt it. For instance, there have been numerous reports over the years, though Israel never officially confirms these things, of assassinating key Iranian nuclear scientists.
A very risky tactic.
Extremely risky, aimed squarely at setting back Iran's progress. And then there are the cyber attacks. Very sophisticated ones. The most famous is probably the Stuxnet virus.
Right, I remember that. That was designed specifically to damage their centrifuges.
Exactly. It targeted the industrial control systems, the digital brains running the centrifuges in facilities like Natanz. It physically sabotaged them from the inside digitally.
Wow, so this multi-layered approach from both sides, it just shows the depth of the rivalry.
Yeah.
Always trying to undermine each other.
Yeah.
Often in secret.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the strategic landscape, you can clearly see this long-term, really intricate chess match playing out. Every move is meticulously designed to counter what they perceive the other side is doing or planning to do. This rivalry, it hasn't just escalated steadily, it's cycled through intense proxy wars, think Lebanon, Gaza, then periods of diplomatic standoffs on the world stage. And all along this continuous stream of covert ops, intelligence gathering, sabotage attempts.
And international efforts to stop this, like the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, the JCPOA.
Right, the JCPOA. That was perhaps the most significant attempt to de-escalate and prevent exactly this scenario. But ultimately, those attempts failed to stop this direct confrontation.
Why do you think they failed?
Well, the JCPOA faced challenges right from the start. The U.S. withdrawal in 2018 was a major blow, obviously, but even beyond that, each failure or even partial success in diplomacy, it just seemed to reset the clock. The underlying ideological hatred, the strategic competition, that just kept simmering beneath the surface, until eventually it boiled over into the direct, open conflict we saw in June 2025. The fact that diplomacy couldn't find a lasting solution really speaks volumes about how deep-seated this rivalry is, the profound mistrust.
So the tension was clearly building for years, decades even, but it hit boiling point, you said, in early June 2025. There was a specific trigger event.
Yes, a very specific event that unequivocally crossed a critical line. Israel launched a major military operation, codenamed Operation Rising Lion.
Okay, what did that involve?
It involved a series of highly coordinated airstrikes. The primary targets were Iran's most sensitive nuclear facilities, especially the Natanz Enrichment Center, which is really the heart of their program.
So this wasn't just a warning shot?
Not at all. And the attack wasn't just about hitting buildings. It reportedly resulted in the killing of several high-ranking Iranian nuclear scientists, and also senior officers in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Wow, hitting scientists and IRGC commanders. That's a huge escalation from covert ops.
It absolutely was. A direct, open military assault on Iran's most sensitive strategic assets and its elite personnel. It challenged their sovereignty in a way that hadn't happened before.
So for Iran, this strike, it must have been seen as crossing a major red line.
Undeniably. It was immediately interpreted as a direct assault on their strategic capabilities, their national sovereignty. It was seen not just as aggression, but as an existential challenge, one that demanded a very public, very clear response. The specific targeting key scientists, critical infrastructure like Natanz, it moved the conflict irrevocably, out of the shadows of proxy wars and covert ops, into the open. State-on-state military action.
A fundamental change in the rules of engagement.
Absolutely. It shattered the unwritten rules that had, subtly governed their rivalry for so long. It set the stage for immediate and very dangerous retaliation.
And Iran's response, you see, it was swift and decisive. Tell us about that.
It was incredibly fast. After Operation Rising Lion, the public reaction from Iran's leaders, Supreme Leader Khamenei, President Raisi, was immediate. Vehement vows of vengeance. They made it absolutely clear this attack would not go unanswered.
And they followed through.
They did. And quickly. Within a stunning 24 hours, Iran launched a massive, coordinated counterattack. They used dozens of their advanced drones and missiles, and they aimed them directly at major Israeli cities, Tel Aviv, Haifa, and also critical military sites.
Did Israel's Iron Dome intercept them?
It intercepted many, yes. It's a sophisticated system. But some inevitably got through. They penetrated the defenses and caused significant damage in those cities.
So real damage in Tel Aviv and Haifa.
Yes, significant damage reported. This wasn't some subtle warning shot from Iran. This was an undeniable declaration. Direct engagement. It just shattered that long-held illusion of exclusively indirect conflict.
And the world watched this happen. Open attacks between Iran and Israel for the first time.
The world watched in, I think, stunned silence initially, and then growing alarm. It was the first full-scale military engagement between them. It instantly grabbed intense international attention, and it fueled those deep fears of a much broader regional war.
So this immediate, forceful exchange, it raises that profound question you mentioned earlier. What happens when these two regional powers, used to fighting through proxies, take the fight directly to each other's doorsteps?
Exactly. It fundamentally changed the strategic calculations for everyone involved, for them, for the region, for the world. The immediate global reaction just highlighted the critical instability that this kind of direct conflict injects into an already volatile region.
Okay, let's walk through those initial, really harrowing days. The situation escalated incredibly fast. It starts on June 13th. That's when Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, the airstrikes on Natanz, other sites, resulting in the deaths of scientists, IRGC commanders, a direct hit on Iran's strategic capacity. And Iran immediately vows retaliation.
Yeah.
That set the stage.
Right. Then just a day later, June 14th, stretching into June 15th, Iran makes good on its threat. A massive show of force. Coordinated barrages, drones, missiles targeting Israeli cities, military bases.
And reports of civilian casualties came out quickly.
Yes, reports surfaced very quickly. Casualties in Tel Aviv, Ashdod, places where the Iron Dome, might have been overwhelmed locally, leading to direct hits on homes, infrastructure. We heard accounts, terrifying sounds of sirens, explosions, people scrambling for shelters. It really brought home the immediate human cost.
Then Israel hit back immediately.
Wasted no time, retaliated with more extensive air raids, targeting major Iranian cities, Tehran, Esfahan, Shiraz, aiming for military and strategic sites within those cities. This immediate tit-for-tat, it established an extremely dangerous pattern, showed both sides were grimly willing to escalate like never before.
Then the conflict broadened between June 16th and 18th.
Yes, it moved well beyond those initial retaliations. Israel stepped up its actions significantly, started systematically destroying suspected missile storage sites, key communication hubs deep inside Iran, trying to degrade Iran's ability to launch more attacks, coordinate its forces.
And the human cost mounted.
Tragically, yes. The death toll on the Iranian side rose dramatically during those days. Reports indicated it exceeded 200, and critically, that number included many civilians caught in the crossfire. Widespread suffering, displacement.
And then the cyber front opened up.
Right. That added a whole new dimension. Iranian hackers, presumably state-directed, launched sophisticated cyber attacks against Israeli infrastructure, disrupting power grids, causing chaos at airports. Essential services hit.
It really shows how modern conflicts just spread beyond the battlefield, doesn't it? Affecting daily life directly.
Exactly. And the expansion into the digital realm makes it much harder to contain. Everything's interconnected. It adds this layer of complexity, unpredictability, non-physical attacks having very real, tangible consequences for millions.
Okay, June 19th. The escalation continues.
It does. It reaches even deeper into the strategic core of both countries. Iran fired long-range missiles, this time targeting specific Israeli defense sites, suggesting maybe a more precise approach, aiming for significant military impact.
And Israel's response?
They specifically targeted the IRGC's intelligence headquarters in Tehran, a critical blow aimed at crippling their command, control, intelligence operations.
And casualties rising on both sides by this point.
Yes, casualties continue to mount. In Israel, reports indicated the death toll rose to over 24, largely from those missile attacks. And as this spiral continued, the international community really started sounding the alarm bells loudly. The United Nations issued an urgent, almost desperate call for an immediate ceasefire, a plea to stop the violence before it engulfed the entire region.
And then just a day or two later, June 20th, 21st, something even more alarming happened.
Yes, the situation took an extremely alarming turn. Israel targeted Iran's Bushehr nuclear facility.
The nuclear power plant.
Yes. That specific strike immediately sparked grave fears globally. fears of radioactive fallout. It raised the terrifying possibility of an environmental disaster, a wider humanitarian crisis, impacting the whole region for decades, far beyond the immediate fighting.
That really pushes things into dangerous new territory.
Extremely dangerous. The risks extend way beyond military casualties to long-term environmental and public health catastrophe. It absolutely heightened global anxiety.
But despite this, Iran made some kind of diplomatic offer.
They did, a conditional offer. They announced readiness for diplomacy, but only after Israeli aggression ceased. So, signaling a willingness to talk, maybe, but on their terms, trying to control the narrative of de-escalation.
And the EU stepped in.
Yes. In response to this escalating crisis, particularly the attack on Bushehr, the European Union initiated critical mediation talks in Geneva, reflecting those urgent global efforts to try and de-escalate before this spirals completely out of control, potentially dragging in more powers.
Let's shift focus now to Iran's internal situation during all this. You mentioned they're defiant, but facing challenges.
Immensely challenging, yes. They're trying to project strength internationally while grappling with really significant domestic pressures. The economy. It's been hammered for years by crippling international sanctions, restricted oil exports, limited access to global finance.
Plus internal issues.
Right. Compounded by internal corruption, mismanagement, leading to dire consequences for ordinary Iranians. Rampant inflation, making basics unaffordable, high unemployment, especially for young people, and this palpable growing public discontent simmering just beneath the surface. We've seen protests flare up periodically.
Yet the leadership remains defiant.
Remarkably so. They seem to view this conflict as, well, twofold. A defensive necessity, given the attacks on their nuclear sites and personnel, but also, crucially, as a potent opportunity, a chance to reassert their regional influence, rally support.
How are they projecting that strength?
The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, fully mobilized all major divisions, deployed forces across the country to key points, projecting readiness for a prolonged fight. And Ayatollah Khamenei reinforced this message, issued a powerful call for national unity against Zionist aggression, framing the war as a collective defense of the nation, its principles, trying to rally people around that common enemy narrative.
That sounds like a really complex internal picture. Balancing defiance with these deep economic and social strains must be incredibly difficult.
Profoundly difficult. It highlights the tightrope the leadership is walking, trying to maintain public support, control, while prosecuting a potentially devastating war. Presenting a united front externally, but internally, the pressures are immense. It reveals the inherent contradictions in their position.
And Iran is also reaching out to its allies in the region.
Yes, actively reaching out to its established network. The Syrian regime, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi rebels in Yemen. This is a clear signal. They intend to wage a multi-front war if necessary, broadening the conflict beyond just Iran and Israel, leveraging their regional network to exert maximum pressure.
But it's not all unity inside Iran. You mentioned divisions.
Correct. Despite the calls for solidarity, internal divisions are definitely surfacing. We're hearing from reformist politicians, various student groups, publicly calling for de-escalation, arguing passionately that the economic cost, the human cost of this war is just too high for a nation already in a fragile state. These dissenting voices, though often suppressed, they illustrate that complex internal calculus. It's not monolithic.
Okay, let's flip to the other side. Israel's strategy. You mentioned it's rooted in swift, decisive action.
Yes, deeply rooted in that long-standing military doctrine, overwhelming force, rapid, preemptive strikes to eliminate threats before they fully materialize. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's held a very hard line on Iran for years, especially its nuclear program, he's framed this conflict in stark, uncompromising terms. It's about national survival for Israel.
He's insisted they must neutralize Iran's nuclear capability.
Repeatedly, before it's too late, portraying a nuclear Iran as an existential danger that simply cannot be allowed.
So what are Israel's specific goals in this conflict?
They're quite clear and aggressive. First, destroy Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities. That's core. Second, eliminate top commanders in the IRGC and the Quds Force.
The Quds Force, that's the IRGC's external operations arm.
Exactly. Responsible for overseas ops supporting proxies, so targeting the leadership, the operational capacity of Iran's military and expeditionary forces. And third, fundamentally undermine Iran's regional proxy networks. Dismantle the system Iran uses to project power across the Middle East.
But this strategy, even with Israel's military advantages, it carries big risks, doesn't it?
Oh, significant risks. A sustained, long conflict with Iran could severely stretch Israel's resources, military and economic, and it risks provoking much more intense attacks on multiple fronts simultaneously.
From Hezbollah,
Hamas.
most notably, yes. Hezbollah in the north along the Lebanese border, Hamas in Gaza to the south. Both are well-armed, experienced. They could launch significant missile barrages, potentially overwhelming even Israel's sophisticated air defenses like Iron Dome and putting immense strain on the civilian population.
And diplomatically, what are the risks there? That's a major factor, too. Israel is working hard to keep support from key allies, especially the U.S. But global opinion is often divided, and as civilian casualties inevitably mount in a conflict like this, Israel faces a very real risk of diplomatic isolation, eroding that critical international backing.
It sounds like a very delicate, dangerous balancing act.
Absolutely. Trying to achieve their military objectives while managing these huge regional and international repercussions. It's a high-stakes gamble. Military success has to be weighed against potential regional destabilization and diplomatic fallout. The long-term consequences go way beyond the battlefield.
Now, the world's response.
Yeah.
You mentioned the UN, the EU trying to mediate. How effective has that been?
Well, the alarm bells are definitely ringing globally. International bodies are stepping in. The UN has held multiple emergency sessions, trying desperately to find a path to de-escalation. The EU dispatched high-level envoys. Peace talks started in Geneva. But progress seems frustratingly slow, reflecting those deep divisions, the profound lack of trust between Iran and Israel.
So the efforts are there, but facing huge challenges. What about the United States? What's their position?
The U.S. finds itself in an incredibly difficult spot, trying to balance its traditional, unwavering alliance with Israel against the urgent need for regional stability. Their approach has been notably cautious.
Cautious how?
Well, they consistently reaffirm their commitment to Israel's security, that's clear. But at the same time, they're urging both sides with increasing urgency to de-escalate immediately. It's a delicate diplomatic tightrope, supporting an ally while trying to prevent a wider war.
And they've reinforced their military presence.
Yes, notably reinforced their military presence in the Gulf. This isn't necessarily backing one side's actions. It's more a strategic deployment, aimed at deterring further escalation, preventing the conflict from spreading wider, protecting shipping lanes. It's a clear signal to everyone that the U.S. is deeply invested in preventing a catastrophic, wider conflict.
And looking around the region itself, how are other countries reacting? You said it's a mixed bag.
Very mixed. It really underscores that complex, unpredictable web of alliances and rivalries in the Middle East. You have the Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia, the UAE condemning the violence, but remaining extremely cautious. They disapprove of the conflict, sure, but they also have their own deep strategic worries about Iran's ambitions. They're wary of getting dragged in.
And others pushing for talks.
Right. Qatar and Turkey have been advocating strongly for immediate negotiations. Pushing for a swift return to diplomacy is the only way out.
But Iran's allies are standing firm.
Absolutely. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, they've publicly declared unwavering solidarity with Iran. And given their military capabilities, that raises serious, chilling fears of a broader, more devastating regional war. One that could draw in even more players and completely destabilize the entire region, pushing it towards an unprecedented level of conflict.
Okay, let's zoom out again. We've talked about the history, the escalation. But what are the fundamental drivers? Why now? What pushed this long-standing rivalry into open war?
Well, at its absolute core, that nuclear shadow looms largest. It's a pivotal security concern, particularly for Israel. You could call it their ultimate red line, the immediate issue. Iran enriching uranium beyond 60%.
Which is very close to weapons grade.
Very close. Weapons grade is typically around 90%. 60% means they're just a short technical step away from having the material for a bomb. From Israel's viewpoint, that's not just breaking rules, it's an imminent, intolerable threat to their existence.
They see a nuclear Iran as fundamentally destabilizing.
Completely. They argue it would trigger a dangerous arms race in the region, potentially leading to catastrophe. This deep-seated fear has driven so many of Israel's actions, their hardline stance. It's a threat they feel they simply cannot live with.
And beyond the nuclear issue, there's the ideology.
Yes, the profound ideological bedrock of the Iranian regime itself. Since 1979, the Islamic Republic has been fundamentally based on opposition to Israel. It's not just politics, it's woven into their national narrative, their education, their religious doctrine, as we discussed.
So compromise is incredibly difficult.
extremely difficult, if not impossible, for powerful factions within Iran. This deep ideological element creates this perpetual animosity. It can't just be negotiated away easily because it's tied to the regime's very legitimacy and core beliefs.
It's foundational.
Foundational. And then there's the contest for regional power. This is also a power struggle, a fight for regional leadership. Both Iran and Israel are actively vying for dominance, for influence in the Middle East, trying to shape the region's future.
Using different strategies.
Different strategies, yes. Iran leverages its proxy network, its allies, to expand its influence, challenge rivals. Israel uses its superior military tech, its strong diplomatic ties, especially with the West, to maintain security, project power, often through strikes and intelligence. This fundamental competition for leadership, resources, strategic advantage, it constantly fuels tensions. It's the volatile backdrop to this direct conflict.
And there's another angle some analysts raise, the idea of political distraction.
Yes, it's a sobering thought, isn't it, that domestic pressures might play a role. Some analysts suggest both governments might be using the war, at least partly, to divert public attention from internal crises.
Like Netanyahu's legal troubles in Israel.
Exactly. He's faced ongoing corruption trials, significant political challenges, protests. War can sometimes rally a divided public around an external threat.
And Iran's internal pressures.
Similarly, Iran's regime is under immense economic and social strain. Sanctions, unemployment, widespread discontent manifesting in protests. The argument is that external conflict can be a convenient rallying cry. Unite the populace against a common enemy, shift focus away from internal problems, leadership accountability.
Doesn't mean the conflict isn't real, but internal dynamics might influence its timing or intensity.
Precisely. It adds another layer of complexity to understanding the why.
Amidst all this strategy and politics, it's absolutely vital we remember the human cost, which is already immense.
Immense and growing daily. The scale of destruction we're seeing, it points to a severe, immediate impact on civilian life. It's creating an urgent humanitarian crisis. In Iran, reports indicate bombings have devastated essential infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, homes reduced to rubble, leaving countless people without vital services, without safe shelter.
In shortages.
Yes, medical supplies are reportedly running perilously low, making even basic care incredibly difficult. And humanitarian corridors needed to get aid in and civilians out are often blocked or just too dangerous because of the fighting, making it incredibly hard for aid groups to reach those in desperate need.
It sounds horrific, and the impact on Israel, also severe.
Equally severe, deeply traumatic, daily life utterly disrupted, air raid sirens multiple times a day, forcing people into crowded shelters, creating this constant state of anxiety, fear.
Just imagine living like that, the constant threat.
Exactly. Public shelters are at capacity. Vital infrastructure power, transport has sustained significant damage from drone and missile attacks. And tragically, both sides report civilian casualties. A stark reminder that war doesn't discriminate. Beyond the physical wounds, there's widespread psychological trauma, affecting children, adults, everyone, and significant internal displacement. Families forced to abandon homes, seeking refuge elsewhere in uncertain conditions, lives completely uprooted.
So how can the international community even respond to this unfolding humanitarian disaster?
That's the critical question. International organizations like the Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, MSF, they are urgently appealing for immediate ceasefires. Their main goal: establish safe, unhindered humanitarian corridors. Get critical aid food, medicine, shelter to those affected, emphasizing aid must be neutral, guided only by need.
And refugees.
That's a rapidly growing concern. And neighboring countries are already bracing for potential large influxes of people fleeing the fighting, anticipating a major humanitarian exodus that could further destabilize the region, strain resources massively. The immediate challenge isn't just stopping the fighting, but managing the profound human consequences already happening and preventing an even bigger crisis.
Looking ahead, no one has a crystal ball, obviously, but analysts are considering different ways this could play out. What are some possible future scenarios?
Well, one possibility is a stalemate leading to a ceasefire. In this scenario, both countries essentially incur enough damage politically, economically, militarily, that it compels them to negotiate. The cost just becomes too high.
Mediated internationally?
Likely, yes. By bodies like the EU or UN stepping in to facilitate talks, provide a framework. A temporary truce, while maybe not lasting peace, could crucially open doors for renewed talks, maybe on the nuclear issue again. So a return to negotiation driven by mutual exhaustion, perhaps. A pause, if not a resolution.
Then there's the scenario everyone fears most: full-scale war.
That's the one causing the most apprehension, yes. The nightmare scenario. The conflict expands dramatically. It pulls in those major proxy forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, igniting multiple fronts. And critically, it carries that serious risk of drawing in bigger global powers, maybe even U.S. forces directly.
The global impact would be
Catastrophic. Oil prices would skyrocket, triggering a severe global economic crisis, supply chains disrupted, markets destabilized worldwide, and global security would face unprecedented threats, potentially leading to a broader international conflict with utterly unpredictable consequences.
a truly terrifying prospect.
It connects to the bigger global picture starkly. A full-scale regional war could trigger global economic and security crises affecting every continent. Stability, prosperity, international relations, all profoundly impacted.
Is there a more optimistic path? Maybe strategic de-escalation?
That's another possibility, though perhaps less likely given the current intensity. It would involve quiet, behind-the-scenes diplomacy, working diligently to cool things down, leading to phased military withdrawals, maybe some confidence-building measures between them.
Could concessions be involved?
Potentially. For instance, maybe Iran agrees to halt uranium enrichment in exchange for lifting some sanctions, providing an economic incentive, relief for the Iranian people. This scenario really highlights the power of back-channel diplomacy, even when tensions are sky-high, where pragmatic interests might override ideology. It would be slow, painstaking, requiring immense political will, but it could incrementally reduce the threat, open doors.
And one final scenario involves internal changes. Regime collapse or political upheaval.
Yes, this one raises the question, can the internal pressures within these countries withstand a prolonged war? Or could the war itself trigger fundamental change? This scenario could be catalyzed if internal dissent grows massively due to the war's strains, economic hardship, casualties, national exhaustion.
What could that look like?
For Iran, potentially complete regime change, a fundamental shift in its politics, maybe its foreign policy, huge regional implications. In Israel, prolonged conflict, high costs, casualties. It could trigger new elections, potentially bringing in different leaders with a different approach, reflecting public dissatisfaction. So internally driven, but with profound external consequences for regional stability, a new, unpredictable landscape.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean? This Iran-Israel war of 2025. It feels like a truly defining moment.
It absolutely is a profoundly defining moment in the modern history of the Middle East. You could see it as a brutal culmination. Decades of hostility, deep mistrust, and tragically political miscalculations leading finally to direct confrontation, shattering a fragile balance.
And the victims.
While both sides claim self-defense, national interest, it's unequivocally clear. The real victims are the countless civilians caught in the crossfire, their lives shattered by destruction, displacement, constant fear.
Which underscores the need for international action.
Urgently. A critical imperative for the international community to act swiftly, decisively, mediate an end to the conflict, support humanitarian efforts, prevent the spiraling into an even worse catastrophe. Knowledge is valuable, but understanding is key, and understanding this crisis is the first step towards seeking solutions, the path to lasting peace. It's long, it's uncertain, but dialogue, backed by sustained international pressure, really remains the only sustainable route forward.
The world is watching and hoping, desperately, for cooler heads to prevail. As you reflect on everything we've discussed in this deep dive, maybe consider this question. Beyond the bombs and missiles, what role do you think those deeper factors, international economic pressures, or shifts in domestic politics truly play in either keeping conflicts like this going or perhaps ultimately helping to end them? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you found this discussion insightful, and we hope you did, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Learning English Lab YouTube channel. We'll have more deep dives into complex global topics coming soon.